Good afternoon. Happy Sunday. I hope you're enjoying your day. We are coming to you for our third and last day of our Maintenance is Preservation Facebook Live. Today we're going to talk about repairing versus replacement, choosing repair materials, and some of that will be choosing replacement materials, how to choose a preservation contractor, and then our question that was posed to us was how to maintain, preserve our wood. So we'll talk about that. Some of that will be in the repair versus replace segment, but we will also, talk about that individually. So thank you for joining us today. I hope that you found day one and day two full of valuable information for you. Um, so when you are, after you've developed your plan and you've decided that, what priorities you need to maintain on your building, you need to, I typically we tell people to go to the Secretary of Interior for guidance on how to do the least amount of harm to a building. And that's pretty much what the Secretary of Interior says is don't do anything to the building that cannot be undone at a later date when you're doing work on the building. There are some other guidelines in there about infill and historic districts, but individual buildings, it's how not to hurt the building so that there's permanent damage and something that cannot be undone. So the order of operations, I guess using a math term, is to, protect and maintain the building, which is what we've been talking about. Don't lose the historic fabric. If you notice that there's things that need to be repaired, retain as much of the historic fabric as possible. And then you can replace it, and replacement in kind is the concept, wood with wood, metal, like cast iron with cast iron, I'm trying to think what other, masonry, if you're replacing stone, replace it with real stone, not veneer. So there's that's the replacement in kind, and then if all else fails you have to rebuild it, and that's a restoration process. They also look really heavily on the touch points, so the points of the building where people will touch. So you wouldn't replace a wood handrail with something that is synthetic, like a plastic or something like that, because if people touch it, they'll know that it's, so that's something else that they look at when they're evaluating, just for future reference. So today we're going to focus on repairing. So if you need to repair something, typically we use the 50%. So if it's more than 50% deteriorated, we will replace it. We were typically replace it with tropical hardwood or a salvaged wood, like old growth wood. The new growth wood here is not rot resistant, it's not decay resistant, you're not going to get longevity out of it. And one of the goals of working on an older building is to not continually have to replace things, because that's, every time you go back to it, you're destroying more of the historic fabric. So if you're looking for a replacement for wood, definitely look for something that's it's very dense and that's rot and decay resistant. The pine now is not, the cedar is not. If you want to use a native wood that isn't tropical, go to the old growth. There's salvage wood dealers that you can go to and you can get wood. Definitely treat it with Boracare before you install it. But that's the wood that you need to choose. The other option, so if it's less than 50%, we'll either do a solid wood Dutchman, which is taking out, and Jonathan can explain that. Do you take out the decayed wood?
Yeah, you take out the decayed wood, and you basically are cutting like little puzzle pieces to fit in to fill it back up with hard new wood.
Sound wood.
Yes.
Yeah. And do you use adhesives to then hold that in place?
I use a combination of things. A lot of times we use a yellow wood glue. It's usually a type 3, so It's not.
Oh, tight bond. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not. It's the water resistant and all that stuff. So you're looking for that. That way the water doesn't affect the joint, the glues and everything. So that's pretty much it. You try not to nail it in. Try to use pressure and glue so that way the nail doesn't cause another rot spot.
And do you sometimes use joinery too?
Yeah.
Okay. And so then but if it's just a small amount of rot or decay, you also remove the decayed wood, but then we use consolidant and epoxy repair system. Then there's two different kinds that we personally use, and it depends on what we're doing. So if we're doing small repair pieces, or like the joints where the mortise and tenon come together, we will use PC Woody, and PC Petrifiers, their consolidant.
Mm-hmm.
And they have two consolidants, but we use the petrifier more often. But if it's big voids, typically we'll use Abitron system, which is wood epox and liquid wood.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
We don't use it too often.
Yeah,
so.
No, typically big voids on logs is what we'll use that for, because it's a bulkier. I don't know how to explain it, but
it's
that's
more like a Play-Doh, but they also have dyes that you can mix into it, and that's why we use it for logs. That way you get the dye the whole way through it instead of just on top of it.
Just on the surface.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the repair techniques that you can use if you have, deteriorated. The other nice thing about the epoxies, and wood does the same thing, but with the epoxies, is they are sandable and moldable. So you can, if you're just replacing like the part of the mutton on the window that gets the lock hit against it, and you have that like divot out, you can use the epoxy to build that up and then carve the profile to match, so that you don't have to replace that entire mutton. You're preserving the historic fabric, but it visually looks like it's the same, especially once it's painted. So when you're choosing a contractor for your historic home, you need to understand, and the reason that we stopped working on houses that were built, before or after World War II, is because building really changed. The building industry, so there wasn't a lot of building during the Depression. It was mostly like public works. The government was keeping things going, and then all the resources went into World War II. And so then once World War II ended, we had 15 years or so of not a lot of building. We had a lot of people who were coming, the GIs were coming back wanting to set up households, and there wasn't enough housing in America. So we started building development, suburban living, and houses that were cookie cutters. And those houses changed the way we approach building in the country, because instead of a craftsman going in and building the entire house, you got product installers to build houses. So you had a framing crew come in, and it made it more efficient. It was the assembly line of housing.
Pretty much.
Yeah. You have the framing crew come in, all they do is frame. So that's all they do day in and day out. So they're very fast, they're very that's all they do. And it also helps that they're building to what materials are available. So that's why our ceilings got shorter, because you had 8-foot framing material. So then our ceilings are 8 foot high. Then you don't have to get special material. You can just go to the lumberyard, and it makes everything go faster. So, and then you have the drywallers come in, and the window people come in, and every person is now segmented. Rather than understanding how the entire building works, you just have you just have people installing their product. And there's not a lot of thought about how the systems work together, or even
if they're compatible.
Well, and compatible, but also like how to repair them, like because they're thinking about being product installers. So if you don't want to have to come back and repair, you want to come back and install more product.
Well, most of the stuff from the big box stores nowadays, you're saying if they can repair it, all that stuff is not repairable.
No,
So
it's not.
it's designed to be used and thrown out. Simple as that.
So it's planned obsolescence. And so that changed the way building was done in our country. And that's why our cutoff typically is, the mid 20th century, because buildings built after that are were constructed much differently. Although I am to be nominated for the national registry, it's 50 years. And so I think now 1969 is the cutoff to be on the national register. So maybe one day we'll get to do a split level. I have my fingers crossed. But so you want to make sure that you have a contractor that is very familiar with historic buildings and how they work and traditional methods and materials. You don't want somebody who comes in and looks at a problem that is repairable and just they don't understand what's happening. They don't understand how to fix it. So they're going to just tell you either it's not fixable, run away, be afraid, or
it's going to take too much work and too much money to
and you
fix
just
it,
need to
and they
replace
have no
it.
clue, really.
Right, and you just need to replace it. We've had I can't tell you the number of times that I've gone out to visit somebody's house, and I'm like, well, that's repairable, and they're like so excited because everybody else has told them you just need to replace it. And typically things are repairable, and it's better to repair it because it's old growth wood, it's traditional joinery, it's part of the history of the house. That I mean, even though we can replicate the joinery and the methods and materials, it's not the same as what is there. If you have the original should stay with the house.
Mm-hmm. Because even though we use a lot of Sipilia mahogany, which is the tropical hardwoods, it's going to last a long time, but 300-year-old oak is way more superior. If you got an antique oak door or trim or something like that, it's going to last a lot longer.
And you also want to, when you're choosing a contractor, all the things that you hear about choosing a regular contractor, you want to make sure that they're insured and they're licensed and they're you can check their references, all of those things, that they have a track record working on properties of similar projects as yours. But you also want to make sure you find somebody that you like and that you can get along with, because once you get through a project, you want to be able to get along by the end.
Yeah, because it always starts out as exciting because it's something finally getting done, and then it turns into I'm getting irritated and angry because it's not moving as fast as I thought it was, because everybody wants to get to that finish area where they can start doing the designs and the painting and decorating. And to get there, you got to go through a bunch of demolition and turmoil.
You have to trust the process.
And you got to trust the process.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's said about choosing a contractor, we go in and we use terms that everyday people don't use. And a lot of times we'll just get, yeah. And reality is it's like another language. Don't just, if you don't know what a word is, ask. It literally is another language you have to learn just to communicate with a contractor.
So those are the things that I would keep in mind looking for a contractor to work on a historic home. I can't think of anything else. Can you?
Not really.
Okay. So then if you're, then the question of the day was the wood repair and preservation. And I think we talked about that somewhat. I think you need to remember that the old growth wood, if it can dry out, so if it's getting wet and you can dry it out, you can stop whatever's making it wet and it dries out, it typically is okay.
Yes.
But and to preserve it, you need to keep it dry, you need to keep it painted, keep the water out of it. I sat through a presentation a couple years ago it was actually about historic paints, and the man, the expert that was presenting, he said lead-based paint has saved America's woodwork because it wasn't flaking off. So, but keep the water out. I don't recommend, like, I know there are some systems, some epoxy systems that recommend like consolidating the entire building. We don't recommend that because you could actually trap water back behind and start the rot from inside out.
Yeah, we've had a couple of log buildings that we actually came across that used a specific system that is used for boats, but it's all that was also told they could use it for their log houses and stuff, and literally had to take like 3 weeks to scrub it all off the wall by hand so we didn't damage it. And basically what was happening, it was filling up from the inside and rotting from the inside out because of this system that was on it. And there it's like knowing your product again and how everything works. And to get rid of it, it's, even though it was time consuming and it was removing something that wasn't right, it's going to save them so much more money down the road just for taking off the problem. So
The other thing that I would recommend is, you know, if you do have bare wood, the boric hair is really easy to use and put on. You mix it with water, you know, follow the ratios, follow the instructions, and then you just brush it on.
Brush it, you can spray it on, however you can get it on.
Yeah,
and then just let it sit.
And let it sit until you, and for, you can, I think it's like 6 weeks you can let it sit before you paint it, but you have to wait at least 48 hours. That would be another preservation method for wood before you paint it. Typically historic buildings, except for logs, typically historic woodwork is painted. I can't think of anything traditional, maybe sometimes stains, and when they were getting into the faux painting, those, but typically the woodwork was painted. So I don't know if you have any other, you know, wood repair preservation questions, but we'd be happy to answer them. Just let us know if we answered your question specifically. Also, if you've, you know, gone through this and you've watched it and you have, you know, you want to put a maintenance plan in place for your house. I think that the past 3 videos have given you pretty much everything you would need to do to analyze and go through system by system. But if you would want us to do that, we are running a special until March 15th. So if you are interested in that, just reach out to us, Facebook, email on our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, and we'd be happy to talk to you about what you need and let you know more about the maintenance appraisal offer. Did you have anything else, Jonathan?
No, I did not.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your Sunday. I'm going to go make banana bread and finish my laundry.